Hello again. Here we are to continue talking about JavaScript and with our focus on callbacks and map, filter, and reduce. So we talked about map and filter already. Let's talk about reduce now. So reduce is like map and filter, but instead of taking, and for each, right? But instead of taking just one parameter, it also takes a second parameter, okay? So the first parameter, like with map, filter, reduce, and for each, is a callback function that is run once for each item in the source array. And the second parameter is the starting value. And this parameter is actually optional. So if you don't include it, the starting value is the first value from the original array. Okay, so for these examples, I'm always going to include this because actually the biggest mistake that people, or the most common mistake that people make when using reduce is they forget this parameter and then they're not getting the values that they thought they were going to get. Okay, so reduce takes a callback and a starting value, and then it returns a new value. Okay, so let's take a look at the callback. So this is the callback here, and then I put ACC there. We'll call this the accumulator. Okay, so the callback for reduce is a little bit different too. Instead of just taking one item as the first parameter, right? Reduce takes two values. The first value is the accumulator, right? That's kind of like your running total, right? Or your reduced value, right? And then it takes an item from the array. So the idea is, let's imagine that your starting value was 0 and all the items in your array were numbers. Then you could return here, you could say the accumulator plus the item. And then, the next time you called reduce, you would get the value from the last time you called reduce, right? Plus the new item. And then you could add those two things together and then you get a new running total, right? So the accumulator, this is the starting value for it here, but when reduce runs, everything happens in the callback and the accumulator gets passed from here back into the callback again with a new item each time it gets called. And when you're all done looping through all the items, then the total, the last value for the accumulator is what gets passed out here. Okay, so let's look at it like a little bit closer, right? So again, the starting accumulator is that second value that you have here. And so what's important is that if you have an array of objects or an array of strings, but you want to reduce to an array of numbers or something of a different type, then you got to include the starting accumulator, right? Let's take another look. So here's one with real numbers. Let's imagine we have an array of numbers here. And what we want to do is we want to get the sum of all the numbers, like we want to add them all up. So we could say reduce, or we could say values.reduce. And let me make this bold. This is our callback here, right? So the callback takes in the accumulator and one of the numbers. And then it'll return the accumulator plus one of the numbers, right? So our starting value is 0. So the first time reduce runs, accumulator is 0, n is 49. So if we take 0 plus 49, then the answer is 49. And then we call the callback function again, right? Or reduce calls it again for us because it's going to do it once for each item in the array. And now n is 28 and ACC is 49, right? Because that was the last total that we got. Okay, so then we take the 49 plus the 28 and we get, what is that, 77, I guess, right? So we get 77, and then the accumulator is going to be 77 plus 67, right? And then it'll repeat the process until it gets through all the numbers, and the ending total should be 218, right? And that's what gets returned. Okay, so there's an example. Let's take a look at another one. So let's imagine that you have an array of objects, right? So in this case, maybe I want to add up the prices of all the items, right? So I have, they have a name and a price, but I just want the price. So we could say reduce items.reduce. We've got the accumulator and the item. Item is an object, right? And then after the comma here, the starting parameter is the starting accumulator, right? So accumulator starts at 0. The first item is goo, so I take 0 plus item.price, which should be $2.99. So now the accumulator is $2.99, and we call the callback again, and it's $2.99 plus foo, which is our item, and then foo.price is $1.99. So we add item.price to the $2.99 that we had, right? And then it continues, right? So there's another example of using reduce.